North Carolina went to football camp for the fall 1 week ago. We talked some Tar Heels with our guy from North Carolina, Jeff Greenberg of SportsGlutton.com. Hey, Jeff, how are you tonight?
Good, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. Of course, this football team got off to a rugged start last year, rebounded, finished strong, and really looked good in the bowl game against Cincinnati. We talked a number of times in the offseason about, again, a loaded roster in regards to NFL-type talent. Some of that is left. Let's start with a quarterback battle in Marquise Williams, but he's going to be challenged. Your thoughts about the way things size up going into the meat of fall camp?
Yeah, it should be interesting with the quarterback battle. I think that is the number 1, 2, 3, and 4 questions Larry Fedora gets at every press conference. They had a big battle in the spring. I think it's safe to say that they came out of the spring still listed as either or. None was listed as number 1 or number 2. With the fall camp to decide a lot of that, I think what you've got also, the offseason was productive for Williams and Trubisky both. I think one of the things that makes this interesting is the fact that however the coaches in Fedora have handled this, it really hasn't had that stressful effect so far in camp on the team that a lot of quarterback battles have. Some of that could be because, Williams only had 5 or 6 games to start, and so there wasn't like there was a 2 or 3 year long bond with the receivers where some people might play favorites. But, two, I really think it was the way that Fedora and the coaches have handled the situation. Even now in camp, right now in the fall, each day they alternate who goes with the ones. So one day Williams will be with the ones the whole day. The next day, Trubisky is with the ones all day. So I really think, based on the comments you're seeing, Fedora, new offense coordinator, Luttrell, has all said they can win with both. And right now it's just about who's going to give the production. And so I think going into the season, experience is going to give Williams the start against Liberty, their first game, maybe even the start against San Diego State. I do think, though, what you're going to see is they're going to play as close to 50% in both of those first 2 games and then see where they're standing the next week, which is an open week, before they head to ECU.
Jeff, this offensive line was loaded with experience in 2013. Much of that has gone. A little bit's left over. Would that be the major concern for you for this football team looking at positional units, would be the offensive front?
I think, yeah, if you looked at positions, that was the number 1 concern coming out of last season, going into the spring. I think there's a little more confidence in how they handled themselves in the offseason with tackles and players like John Heck really getting good reviews early in camp so far this week. It's just very young. So there's a lot of unproven talent. They've gotten some playing time, but no one's had a significant amount of playing together. So Heck had some experience. Landon Turner is the junior who's the leader of the line. But you're looking at a lot of young guys that just have to show up and prove that they can gel together. And I think the speed about which that happens coming together will determine how successful they are earlier in the year. But the offensive line, if you ask the coaches, they'd all say that was the number 1 concern, more so because of youth and just not knowing what to expect. They've got the talent, they've got the big guys on the line to do it. They just haven't done it in a game situation.
Jeff, unfortunately, every time we do one of these, it doesn't matter what the school is, so I'm not looking down at any particular school because it seems to be across the board. Something comes up in regards to somebody doing something off the field that is a little disturbing. So what's the latest on that front, and it seems to affect possibly the defensive line play?
Yeah, the good news with regards to North Carolina in the last few years, when it's having to deal with Larry Fedora and his staff, is all of the mess that's gone on has nothing to do since they've been there. Unfortunately, no matter how hard you try, I think you can only take players to a certain extent with regards to academics. And unfortunately, in the last month or two, they did have some academic casualties, that guys that are no longer with the team, and an unusual concentration on the defensive line. So it was a big hit actually a week before practice. They lost 2 guys who were really counting on. One was an upperclassman senior, which is a shame because they only have 6 seniors left on the whole team. Another was a real promising redshirt freshman, Webb, who hopefully is going to work his way through and matriculate back. But for Underwood being a senior, that's just inexcusable. And then there's a question mark with another upperclassman, Farmer. He's practicing with the team, but there's an issue still to be resolved, so that's hanging out there. So where we were talking about offensive line being a concern because of youth, there was a lot of excitement with the depth of the defensive line. And so they've had to do some tinkering. The good news is, I guess, if you were a fan wondering what's going on, is these issues were known back in the spring, so the coaches have been planning, working, strategizing, and moving guys around to work through this situation since then. It wasn't something that was sort of just dropped on them at the last minute. And I think what they're looking for is some guys to step up. They were used to, in Coach Fedora's words, the North Carolina defensive line has always had, the last decade or so, one or two big-name guys, like you mentioned, to go into the NFL, and there isn't one big-name guy right now, so there's a lot of guys that can make a name for themselves, and that's what they're looking for them to do. But depth's going to be a concern injury-wise, and I think they're tinkering with playing some guys in positions they haven't played with to make up for that.
That's a nice little segue, Jeff, because this program intrigues me from that standpoint, because if we lined up the elite programs in college football, North Carolina would not be there. If we lined up the teams that produce the most NFL talent, they wouldn't be right at the top, but they would be somewhere in that lower portion of the top 10. They would be very high on the list. So I don't know if that's them not developing the talent to win on the field right there while they're in college, or maybe they recruit elite talent, then there's a drop-off and they don't have the depth. But Larry Fedora, going into his third season, again, they had the nice finish last year to finish at, I believe, 7-6. Your thoughts about where this program stands and what possibly could happen this season with the target date possibly being 2015 with a lot of young talent and only 6 seniors you mentioned. I think that's a pretty remarkable statistic. But looking at this fall and what this program's capable of.
Well, and that's a good point you make. 2015, that fourth year, is always the year a lot of coaches look at. And that's the year I know Fedora and his staff have really focused on. However, what he's recognized this year is that, yes, they only have 6 seniors, and that actually makes this the youngest team he said he's coached in his entire career. But sometimes what that brings opportunity, and this year, the Coastal Division side of the ACC is a wide-open race. On the Atlantic side, I think you have Florida State is going to be really tough to beat. Clemson's going to battle for it, but they're breaking in a new quarterback. But in the Coastal, you've got Miami breaking in a new quarterback. You've got Virginia Tech looking for a quarterback. Duke still returns a solid core, so they'll be interesting, but they had a few key losses. And then you have UNC. And I think that being that wide open makes this year interesting. With regards to the talent and where he is right now, it's a young team. But when you see the youth that he's bringing in, last year on the offense, 80% of the touchdowns were done by freshmen and sophomores. So the youth he has are effective. The guys like preseason All-American Brian Switzer, he's a true sophomore. You've got Trubisky, who's a redshirt freshman, trying to push Williams for the starting spot in QB. You've got a young defensive backfield, but they got so much playing time last year that the defense coordinator feels this is actually the most aggressive defensive backfield they've had in their 3 years, and they'll be able to do more than they've had in previous years. So they're definitely, you can see the effects locally on recruiting. They're doing the right things. They may be young, but they like the youth they have. And because this year is actually wide open, there's a chance for them to step up. The preseason rankings are all over the place. You have the ACC writers have picked UNC 4th in the Coastal, but then the coaches in the country have put them 23rd in the nation. So I think what that shows you is they have a chance to take advantage of this. That's what Fedora is focusing them on, trying to build off that momentum last year and let them know that there is an opportunity to have a big impact this year.
Which means that the media's bypassed, or actually is with Clemson and Florida State obviously in the top 25 preseason coaches poll. They've bypassed 3 teams from the other division, from the Coastal Division, and North Carolina gets plucked up as only the 3rd team, I believe, in the ACC in the preseason top 25, and the coaches and the media guys are not really seeing eye to eye there. But I do think you can throw a blanket over North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, Of course, Florida State's the class, but they're in the other division, and then you drop a rung or so. You got Clemson, Louisville's in that division, but in your division, wow, it is wide open.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. Virginia Tech and Miami. Virginia Tech's trying to rebound from an unusual poor year. They're trying to find a quarterback. That's a big deal with any team. Miami's in the same boat. Their quarterback that they thought was going to start tore his knee. The quarterback that was going to start in his place is now suspended for the first game against Louisville, which could be a big game since you're opening in the conference. Duke's the one I think people better not sleep on, though, because they lost a big player that transferred to Fresno State. He was their kind of wildcat quarterback who scored, I think, 20 to 21 touchdowns last year. And while their starting quarterback's an excellent passer, that guy was one of those wild cards that would come in and push it in the end zone. They have probably one of the best receivers in the country coming back, and they have a great defensive backfield. So you're right. I think, and then again, people like to forget about Georgia Tech, and they wreak havoc just because of their unique offense. You know, when you don't have time to plan for that, they can sneak up on you. So the Coastal, again, I think it's wide open. I think that the way the schedule plays out is going to affect certain teams. Again, I think Miami not having their first two quarterbacks against Louisville to open the season is troublesome. I think UNC having two games and then an open week before they travel to East Carolina to seek out a little redemption for last year's game is a good window. They also catch Clemson early. It's at Clemson, so no one likes to play in Death Valley, but at least, again, Clemson's searching for a new quarterback, some playmakers to replace people like Sammy Watkins. So the good news for UNC is they don't have to play Florida State. But the bad news is it's one of those things where if you slip up in one game, it can cost you, because I think the Coastal is going to be that close.
Jeff, I think you hit on a good point there, because I usually like to think that the best team rises to the top regardless of the schedule. But the ACC is much like the SEC and the Big Ten in that you've got 14 teams. So you only have 8 conference games, so you're missing 5 opponents. You, of course, play everybody in your division, so your competition within the division is exactly the same, but that's 6 games. So you got 2 from the other division, and wow, there are other teams who could be playing. I've looked at these ACC schedules, so I'm not going to point out specific teams, but I know that there are teams that play BC and Wake Forest in the other division. Then there are other teams that play Clemson and Louisville in the other division. That's a 2-game swing right there. If you're looking at teams that are probably going to go 0-2 against the other division, and other teams that are going to go 2-0 almost certainly against the other division.
Absolutely. It's there's been good things with conference realignment. There's been a lot of bad things with conference realignment, and I think it's really wreaked havoc on what you just spoke to, which is just the conference scheduling itself and playing an equitable schedule, which it's almost impossible to do year to year, because unless you allow for shuffling of the divisions, it can be so one-sided that it's not very equitable. I mean, last year you had Clemson and Florida State both make it to BCS games, but they're both in the same division. In the years past, yes, the Coastal was a little stronger with Virginia Tech, and then years where Miami would step up, or years where even Georgia Tech has stepped up. Then out of nowhere last year, you have Duke come out and win 10 games. So it's exciting to a certain extent. It's disappointing, like you said, in certain ways, because I'm sure a team like NC State that's trying to rebound, they know they've got to play Clemson and Florida State every year, and then the Coastal teams they are playing are pretty good.
Jeff Greenberg joins us from sportsglutton.com. Anything in particular you're working on right now, Jeff?
Yeah, I've got a little interview series going on with former Tar Heel Jabari Price. He was the 7th-round pick of the Minnesota Vikings, and so he's fighting for his life to make that roster right now. We had part 1 was a couple weeks ago, which was where, going into camp, where he felt his summer laid and how he did, what his draft experience was like. We're going to catch up with him on Sunday after his first preseason game to see where how camp's going. I know he's listed as number 2 on the depth chart, so that makes for an interesting conversation, sort of doing a mini version of Hard Knocks with Jabari Price.
That's good stuff. All right, Jeff, the season's 3 weeks away. Hopefully we can nab you at some point close to the opener against Liberty. That's right. Liberty?
Absolutely, anytime. Liberty, and they open up with Liberty. San Diego State, then they have an open week before they head to Greenville, North Carolina to face the Pirates.
Very good, Jeff. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks, Mark.